I joined the Army at 17 years old. My parents had to sign me up. They had to sign the paperwork, to let me go ahead and go. I had my 18th birthday in basic training with drill sergeants yelling at me. So I started early. I knew I wanted to be in the military from a young child. I just didn't know what I wanted to do. But I went and talked to the recruiter, and I thought, I'd like to do something where I get a little bit of experience in everything, and I'd like to go into the medical field. So they said, oh, absolutely. You can be a combat medic, and that'd be give you a chance to go at all different kinds of Army units. And the best thing is you get to treat patients and save lives if you go to combat.
Where'd you go to basic training at?
I went to basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri.
Okay. All right. So you earned 3 Purple Hearts, right? Correct. So, I mean that's significant. Considering I have plenty of friends that have a Purple Heart, only 1 Purple Heart, and you have 3. Can you kind of briefly describe what led to those injuries and how did that shape your perspective of service?
Sure, yeah. So in my last tour in Iraq, which was in 2005 and 2006, I was serving with an armor battalion as a young combat medic, and I was wounded 3 times in that tour, fairly severely. The biggest thing I'm proud of is that I actually never went and left the combat zone. I asked to stay because we were short on combat medics, and for some crazy reason, my command let me stay, even though I had severe injuries. So the first injury that I had, I took a sniper round to the front of the helmet. I was in an M1 tank in the gunner's hatch as a medic. We were rolling down the road about 4 o'clock in the morning in Iraq. Started to see flashes in the distance, and before I could duck down into the vehicle, I was struck in the front of the helmet. Obviously the helmet deflected that bullet, but it fractured my skull, fractured my neck, so I broke my neck, and then when I fell inside the turret of the tank, it fractured my leg. Luckily, I was unconscious for all of that. That force knocked me out, and I woke up in the middle of the road with my team surrounding me and the bird coming in to evacuate me out. They took me out there to Balad Hospital, said, hey, we're going to evacuate you to Landstuhl because you've got a broken neck, fractured skull, and some other injuries. And I said, well, I'd really like to stay if I can stay in Iraq. My team needs me. Right, we're short on medics. And they said, oh, well, we'll talk to your chain of command. And my chain of command let me stay. So I stayed there in Balad Hospital, recovered for about 6 weeks, and then jumped right back out in combat patrols again. And about 4 weeks after getting back, I was out on another patrol in my 113 track ambulance in between 2 M1 tanks on a patrol. And we drove over an IED, and it detonated on my vehicle, and it ruptured through the vehicle, went through my vest, and shrapnel entered in through my neck and through my right side and collapsed my right lung. And I found myself there laying in the road again with a collapsed lung. I knew what was wrong with me, but there was no other medical personnel in the area. So one of the combat lifesavers that I actually trained came up and said, Doc, what do you need me to do? And I told him, hey, I need you to do the needle decompression procedure that you were taught in Combat Lifesaver. So he took that 3¼ inch needle, stuck it in my chest, and temporarily relieved my collapsed lung. He saved me. I got evacuated again to Balad Hospital.
So before we go to your 3rd Purple Heart in one tour, I think you and I have actually talked about this. I didn't remember they all 3 were in the same tour, which is crazy. Can you describe a little bit what is it like telling somebody else how to save your life?
Yeah, it's a little scary. When the adrenaline's pumping, you can't breathe. You could be dead within 15, 20 minutes if this doesn't get taken care of. And then, someone that you trained that typically doesn't do this procedure on a regular basis. It's fairly scary because even as a combat medic, we don't do these procedures that often. And it's a very precise procedure. Sticking a huge needle in someone's chest is pretty difficult. So walking him through it and knowing what pain is coming was very, very scary for me. But, it gave me confidence. Once he stuck that needle in my chest and it relieved my my collapsed lung, I could breathe again. It gave me confidence in the skills that the Army taught me. Hey, this procedure actually really does work when it's done well, and it can be done by anybody, right? Even in a stressful situation.
Yeah, I'll tell you the one of the things that I think what the Army got right as we continued on through the global war on terror is, and they renamed it, Tactical Combat Casualty Care TC3. It was doing combat lifesaver and mutual aid, buddy aid, self aid, and I think we learned that because of the sheer sometimes when stuff would occur and you described a situation that I think all of us who had been deployed to the global war on terror experienced at one point or another, there were only a certain number of medics to go around.
Correct.
And then inevitably there would be times where the only people you would have on ground that were remotely medical trained were your combat lifesavers. And I remember the two things that always, as a leader, and you could probably attest to this and describe this a number of times you've been on patrol, the two things that I always kind of stressed about when I was outside the wire was what's my medevac look like, and who are my medical trained personnel, and comms. Because I'm sure you as a combat medic in the middle of a combat zone has probably experienced the fact of like something goes wrong with comms, you're trying to call in a medevac, and then you're working through your PACE plan trying to figure out how to get a bird in route. And I experienced that a couple times, and that's what kind of ingrained in me combat, understanding how to save somebody's life in combat and how to communicate to other people to get the right assets in to save somebody.
Correct. Yeah, for sure. Getting that bird in there is sometimes the hardest thing, because if you're still under enemy fire, a lot of times they won't risk that bird to come in and get you. So you got two options when that happens: fight the enemy, get rid of the enemy and destroy the enemy and have them come in and evacuate you, or retreat and go to a safe area where they'll come in. So that's been was always a difficult situation.
So I know we're digressing a little bit because I want you to talk your third story there. So because we got two old vets in here and we're trading war stories. So and they probably talked about this before you retired, but because what year did you retire?
I retired in 2019.
Okay, so this was definitely a thing before you. So as we started to draw down in Iraq and then ISIS occurred, then we were operating a lot more spread out in Iraq and even in Afghanistan when they were drawn down. Medical assets especially medevac, became a lot less available. And in the height of the global war on terror, it was always about the golden hour, right?
Correct.
Like, hey, look, you have to be able to get somebody from point of injury to a trauma center to combat support hospital within an hour. On my last deployment in 2019 in northern Iraq, they refer to basically what's called the Platinum 20, and a lot of our medics, we went through prolonged field care, whole blood transfusion, some other stuff, and basically the philosophy there was, and this is with an SFAB unit, which technically doesn't exist anymore, the Security Force Assistance Brigades. It was a big thing back in the 18 and 19, and then they've done away with them again, but was you should be able to stabilize a patient within 20 minutes and sustain their life for 24 hours to be able to get them evac. Because we were operating in areas that were not, and that was it was stressful. Different time in Iraq in 2019, but I don't know. Like, was Platinum, because I'm sure you, like, in different levels of care, you all probably work through that in the medical side too.
And so that was definitely a thing. Getting to the patient as
Yeah.
quickly as possible.
Yeah.
And most time it comes down to stopping the bleeding, right? Putting that tourniquet on, or treating that collapsed lung on the extremities, stopping that blood flow within 15 minutes is the thing that saves lives.
Yeah.
Once you get the hole plugged, and they're not bleeding anymore, then you can worry about extending their life.
Do you remember early, like a long time ago, when people were really leery about tourniquets?
Absolutely.
And it was really kind of like, hey, and then it finally they realized, because you mentioned like massive blood loss, right? Was a number one killer on the battlefield, where they were just like high and tight, go. Doesn't matter where you put it, just extremity high and tight. I'm thinking through all of these TC3 things that are just coming back to me, the different acronyms we would use.
When I first came into the Army, tourniquets were a last resort. They
Yeah.
taught us that tourniquets were
Yeah.
the last resort.
Yeah.
You started off with a field dressing,
Yeah.
waited 10 minutes. If the field dressing didn't work, you went to a pressure dressing, and if the pressure dressing didn't work, then last resort
Yeah.
was a tourniquet. And they realized when you are bleeding for 20 minutes because you're waiting for 10 minutes with gin, you bleed out, and then there's no recovery.
Yeah.
So they changed that, which was the smartest thing that they've ever done.
Yeah.
First thing you do
Yeah.
is you put a tourniquet on.
Tourniquet.
We'll worry about the saving the limb later.
Mhm.
Saving the life is more important than
Yeah.
saving the limb, especially
Yeah.
with the prosthetics that they have nowadays.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so we got sidetracked because I'm speaking with a true hero here in professional medic, lifetime of service. So okay, so before we go to the your book and some of the other stuff, just look, we talked about your first two Purple Heart. Can you just briefly talk about that kind of that last one?
So yeah, after I went to the hospital after getting hit with that IED and having that collapsed lung, I spent 7 more weeks in the Balad Hospital. Asked my command again to stay, and they once again let me stay, which was amazing. So after 7 weeks, jumped right back into combat patrols again, and this time about 4 weeks later, we were on a foot patrol out in Baghdad, and mortar rounds started to come in our position. We started to take a little bit of small arms fire, and before we could get to cover, one of the mortar rounds hit close, and it struck one of my buddies in the stomach, some shrapnel. So I ran over to treat him and was treating his combat wound, his abdominal wound, and then another round came in and shrapnel hit me in my lower left leg, kind of bounced off my bone, my shin bone, and kind of blew out the side of my calf. So now I'm treating a wound. Now I've got a leg wound myself. And then a combat lifesaver came over and started treating my leg wound. So it was like a chain of treatment. I was treating the abdominal wound. The combat lifesaver was putting the tourniquet on my leg wound. We called in a medevac, and they said, no, you're still under enemy fire. Mortar rounds are still coming in. You're still under small arms fire. You've got a couple of choices: destroy the enemy or evacuate to a safe area. So we couldn't really exactly pinpoint where those rounds were coming in. So we decided to go ahead and evacuate to a different area, and they still wouldn't come in and get us. So our choice was hoof it back to the fob. So me with my blown out leg and him with his abdominal wound, we put him on a stretcher. Team carried him about 4 miles back to the fob, and we got back to the fob, and the bird came in and took me to my final trip to Balad Hospital to get my leg worked on.
Now you said you stayed in theater that time too.
I stayed in theater that time. So after my third Purple Heart, the command came in to
They were
see
like,
me.
you need to stay in here.
Exactly what they did, right? And that's in the book, right? So that my battalion commander came in and he was like, I was like, I want to stay. You know, I stayed here with a broken neck. I stayed here with a collapsed lung. I stayed here with all these things. This is just a minor flesh wound, as minor as it could be. And he was like, okay, yeah, we'll let you stay. But you are we're about 2 months before going home. He said, you know what? We're not letting you go out on any more combat patrols. He's like, I'm not going to be the one that tells your wife that I let you go back out.
Mm-hmm.
And that fourth time that you got hit, you know, it took you out. He's like, you're going to stay with me. You're going to be my personal medic. You're going to sit inside of the TOC. You're going to be my coffee guy, and you're going to run the radio. So the last 2 months of my tour, that's what I did.
Now where were you? What fob? Were you on Balad?
I was on Balad.
You're on Balad. So you know the crazy thing is because Balad got hit all the time. Can you imagine just like you get I have been in different fobs where we have had soldiers that got hit walking to the chow hall
For sure.
on a mortar truck. But can you imagine? And your commander probably like, all right, now you got to leave.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
Well, I very inspiring your story, overcoming all of that, and appreciate you sharing, appreciate your service. Now, for our viewers that will be watching this, and I've talked to other medics about this before. What's it mean to you when your soldiers start calling you doc?
Yeah. So once they start calling you doc, you have earned their respect. So as a combat medic, you know, you go to different units. So you're with an infantry unit, with an armor unit, and you got to know how each one of these individuals work, right? And once they start calling you doc, you know that they trust you, that you are going to be there to save their life when it goes down. Doc is like the best thing to be called, right? And the best way to be called doc is to get in there and show them that you care, right? You will hoof it just like they do. You'll put on that rucksack. You'll carry that aid bag. When they go out, before they go on patrol, you'll check them out. When we get back from patrol, you'll check them out. So what I would do when we would get back from a long 7-8 hour patrol in the heat, everybody would go sit down and relax, but my job wasn't over, right? I'd go to the freezer and I would get popsicles. I'd walk around and hand out candy to people, check out their blisters on their feet, right? Ask them if they needed anything. Just make sure they were mentally there, because as a combat medic, you're not just there to provide them with the physical care. A lot of times you're that person that they go to when they're having mental issues as well. When they're having some PTSD issues, you're that, that ear that sits there and listens to them, right? And can help their mental wounds as well.